The roar of the crowd shook the stone walls of the Colosseum, a thunder of voices demanding blood. Beneath the Roman sun, gladiators stepped into the arena, their armor gleaming, their bodies scarred, their faces unreadable masks of determination and fear. To the spectators above, they were heroes, killers, and sacrifices all at once. Their battles were theater, their pain a form of entertainment, their deaths fuel for the empire's hunger for spectacle. But beyond the sand and the cheers, their lives told a darker story, one of slavery, humiliation, and fates that rarely ended in glory. Most gladiators were not volunteers but captives, men dragged from conquered lands, stripped of freedom, and forced into the brutal schools where their transformation began. These Ludi gladiatorii were not places of training alone, they were prisons where bodies were hardened and wills were broken. Men were beaten until they obeyed, starved until they submitted, trained until every movement was perfected for death. The iron discipline was unrelenting, for to falter in the arena was not only to fail but to die under the gaze of thousands. Yet among them, some came willingly. Desperate men who had lost everything, criminals seeking a chance at redemption, even citizens driven by debt or hunger sold themselves into the arena's cruel embrace. To them, gladiatorship promised coin, fame, and perhaps a fleeting taste of freedom. But freedom was an illusion. Even the most skilled fighters, the champions adored by the masses, lived shackled to the whims of their masters and the greed of the empire. One day they might be crowned with laurel leaves, the next thrown into the sand to die at the claws of wild beasts. The games themselves were a spectacle of horror and beauty combined. Gladiators fought not always to the death, but always to the edge of it. Blood stained the sand, the cries of the wounded mingled with the roar of lions released into the arena, and the emperor's thumb decided life or death with a single gesture. To the Romans, it was entertainment, to the gladiators, it was survival, a performance where the price of failure was final. The crowd feasted on blood, never considering the broken lives behind the spectacle. And when the day ended and the crowds dispersed, the gladiators did not return to glory but to the shadows of their barracks, chained and confined, knowing that tomorrow's spectacle might be their last. Their secret lives outside the arena were filled not with triumph but with suffering, each moment a reminder that their fate was never their own. When the cheers faded and the blood dried on the sand, the gladiators returned not to triumph but to confinement. Their lives beyond the arena were lived behind iron gates, within the barracks of the ludus, where discipline was harsher than the fights themselves. Here they slept in rows of cramped cells, the air thick with sweat, rot, and despair. Food was rationed, punishments were swift, and freedom was a dream whispered only in the dead of night. They were kept like prized animals, their bodies trained to perfection but their spirits chained to fear. Yet paradoxically, the gladiators became objects of fascination. Roman society both despised and adored them. To the elite, they were the lowest of men, slaves, criminals, outsiders unworthy of dignity. But to the crowds, they were intoxicating. Women of high rank wrote their names on walls, slipping secret letters into the barracks. Some risked everything to visit them in the shadows, drawn to the allure of men who lived each day on the edge of death. For a few gladiators, these forbidden affairs brought gifts, protection, or even a chance at influence. But for most, such liaisons were short-lived and dangerous, punishable by torture or execution if discovered. The brutality extended beyond their matches. Disobedience in the ludus was met with savage punishment, lashes that tore skin apart, starvation in darkness, even death at the hands of fellow fighters forced to kill their own. And should a gladiator show cowardice in the arena, his fate was worse than death. He might be humiliated before the crowd, stripped of armor, beaten, and slaughtered like an animal. The arena demanded not only strength but spectacle, and Rome's appetite for cruelty was endless. For the empire, gladiators were expendable currency, fuel for the theater of violence that reinforced Roman power. They were paraded through the streets before games, mocked and spat upon, forced to entertain citizens whose freedom and privilege rested upon their suffering. In festivals, some were cast not against men but against wild beasts, lions, tigers, bears, imported from distant lands to turn the games into savage carnivals. For the unlucky, this meant being torn apart alive before roaring crowds, their screams drowned by applause. Still, in this darkness, some gladiators carved fragile bonds. They formed brotherhoods, sworn to protect one another, bound by blood spilled together. In their barracks, friendships were forged not by choice but by necessity, as each man knew that death was always near. And though their masters sought to break them, their defiance lived quietly, in whispered plans of escape, in prayers to forgotten gods, in the hope that one day the empire would crumble, and the cages would break. But for most, that hope never came. Beyond the arena, gladiators lived as shadows, and when their usefulness ended, they were discarded, erased, and forgotten. Their deaths were not marked by honor but by silence, their bodies buried without names, their lives remembered only in the fleeting roar of the crowd. The life of a gladiator was a march toward death, and for most, the end came not in honor but in brutality. Few ever tasted freedom, for even those who survived countless battles remained at the mercy of fate. A victorious gladiator might be awarded the rudis, a wooden sword symbolizing release from the arena, but this was a gift reserved for the rarest of champions. Most died long before they could ever dream of it. Their deaths came in the sand, beneath the gaze of emperors, their blood soaking into the earth as the crowd erupted in thunderous applause. Death was not always swift. A gladiator who faltered might be forced to kneel, awaiting the judgment of the emperor or the roar of the people. A downward thumb sealed his fate, and another fighter would drive steel into his neck or chest, ensuring the sand drank deep of blood. Others were left to bleed slowly, their cries echoing through the Colosseum until silence fell. And for those cast into spectacles with beasts, death was even more gruesome, flesh ripped apart by claws and fangs, the crowd watching not with pity but with delight. Outside the arena, deaths could be just as cruel. Some gladiators were executed for disobedience, crucified along the roads as warnings. Others perished in uprisings, like the great revolt led by Spartacus, where thousands of captured fighters rose against Rome only to be slaughtered and lined along the Appian Way, their bodies hanging from crosses for miles. In these moments, the empire showed that gladiators were not men but tools, used, broken, and discarded. And yet, despite their suffering, their legend grew. The blood they shed became part of Rome's identity, a symbol of both its power and its cruelty. The Colosseum itself stands as a monument not only to Roman grandeur but to the countless gladiators whose lives were extinguished within its walls. Each stone is stained, if not by blood, then by the memory of those forced to fight, suffer, and die for the amusement of others. Their secret lives, hidden behind chains and shadows, were lives of torment and fleeting hope. Their brutal deaths were reminders that Rome's glory was built not only on conquest and empire but on the bones of the forgotten. The cheers that once shook the arena have long faded, but the echoes remain, whispering of a world where men were turned into entertainment, where courage was twisted into spectacle, and where freedom was a dream too costly to reach. Today, we remember gladiators not only as warriors but as victims, men trapped in a system that demanded blood for power and cruelty for control. Their lives beyond the arena, their brutal deaths, remain a haunting testament to the extremes of human entertainment and the price paid by those who lived only to die for the crowd. Their story reminds us that the glory of empires is often built upon suffering, and though their names are lost, their legacy still bleeds through history, as eternal as the stones of the Colosseum itself.